Hey, what's up guys? Hello, with Football Talk here. This channel and my page will focus primarily on the draft these next couple of months, but I want to cover the whole off-season, and the first big date coming up is March 17th, exactly 2 weeks from when this video comes out. And while the legal negotiating and tampering period starts 2 days prior to that, this is when free agent deals can become official at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So for that, I decided to preview free agency here a little bit, give you a general overview, but first discussing the characteristics for this year in particular, and then we're going to look at all the individual positions, see who's available, what they might be looking for, teams that may target those groups, and maybe we can find a few connections that make sense here. I'm recording this a day before it officially comes out on YouTube, just in case anybody gets released and is therefore missing on this list. But yeah, let's talk about a few specifics for the 2021 free agency period. So the first thing here, this will definitely be a buyer's market, meaning the elite players will get paid what they are looking for, but especially those middle class free agents will have to take a little less than they usually would because of the reduced salary cap, which will be between $185 and $190 million. There will be a lot of cap casualties, meaning veterans with big contracts who didn't or won't play up to them, and just a wave of available guys that teams want to save some money on, because that's why the drop-off if you have similar players isn't quite as big, especially after you pay your franchise players. Then another thing that comes with it, I think there will be a lot of short-term contracts, because of factors I just discussed. NFL players are very prideful and have the confidence to bet on themselves and earn that big-time contract next year, or even in 2023, when the new TV contracts kick in and we'll see a massive jump in the cap most likely. And I think this will really benefit the contenders, because some of these veterans will be looking to get a chance for a ring and then get paid off that performance. Then of course you have the quarterback factor, and you can take this a lot of different ways. I recently discussed quarterbacks that could be on the move this offseason, the likelihood of them being on the move and where they could go. That video will come on the screen at the end of this one. Carson Wentz has since been traded already, but that's it so far. Of course, the financial resources invested in that position will determine the available cash for other ones, but also teams may be betting on the draft and attack other needs in free agency. You might have some contract discussions a year early, like Lamar Jackson, he's gonna come up. We saw that a year ago with Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes. These things are gonna get pushed to the front because teams usually also want to get that deal done to be able to plan forward, even though it's gonna be interesting with this offseason in particular, if some teams may want to wait. But there will definitely be some discussions. And then you have the allure these guys will have on some veterans that may want to play with them. Just think of Tom Brady last year. A lot of long-timers trying to join him in Tampa Bay and win that ring, which they ultimately did. I could see that becoming a factor as well. And that leads me to my final point, the player empowerment. Athletes are more outspoken now than they have ever been, and this trend has finally also hit the NFL as well. Quarterbacks obviously have the most power, and they have been the storylines this offseason, whether it's Deshaun Watson as the first guy at that position, just entering his prime and wanting to get out of Houston openly. Someone like Russell Wilson, who has never talked about any team issues publicly, now coming out and talking about how he doesn't want to get hit as much, and that he wants to have more of an impact altogether on the game plan and decisions the organization makes. Or even Ravens offensive tackle Orlando Brown, saying that he wants to play left tackle for some team, and kind of forcing his way out of Baltimore. This trend won't go away anytime soon, and it could lead to some big-time trades, as well as affect other moves that can be made. And with that in mind, let's look at all these names, position by position. First and foremost, shout out to Spotrac.com, the best page out there to analyze contracts, see what teams are spending where, and also go through free agents by position or team. This is the overview for all players, but we'll go straight to the first position, which of course is quarterback. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, since I just put a video out on quarterbacks that could be on the move this offseason, where I also discuss potential trade targets and so on, as it pertains to the position. We'll always have the age, the team they're coming from, and then you have the status, which there's 3 different ones. UFA, your typical unrestricted free agents, so the guys that are actually free out there. Then you have the RFA restricted free agents, which are free to negotiate and sign with any team, but the original one can offer various qualifying offers, and if refused, they can put draft pick compensation on them. And then there's a few COs, which are club options, to extend the contract for 2021. There's only going to be very few on here. Obviously the headliner for quarterbacks will be Dak Prescott, and he's going to almost certainly stay in Dallas, whether it's through the franchise tag or a long-term deal, but there's still a very outside chance of a tag and trade situation. After that, there's a bunch of veterans likely signing a 1 or 2 year contract, somewhere as a backup. When you go down here, AJ McCarron, Colt McCoy, Robert Griffin III, Matt Barkley. I would be pretty surprised if he doesn't stay in Buffalo because of what he's done with Josh Allen. Been a very good mentor for him. And further down here, Mike Lennon, Brian Hoyer. Like I said, at this point, just backups. And down here we also have the 2 backups of San Francisco with Beathard and Mullins. There should be at least one of them on the move. But let's not get into the more interesting names when we go back up on the list. With Jacoby Brisettia, who I talked about a couple of weeks ago, how he could be the guy if the Colts miss out on Carson Wentz and maybe don't see a guy out there on the market that they like. He could be a guy to give another chance. The situation was a little weird. I thought he played pretty well in 2019 before he got injured. Obviously with them bringing in Philip Rivers last year, the situation is a little weird now. But like I said, he's a guy that I could see start somewhere. Then you have Mitchell Trubisky, a very interesting name because obviously we know it hasn't gone as smoothly as expected for a number 2 overall pick, but there's still a lot of talent when you look at the arm strength and the mobility that he has. I wouldn't mind for a team that doesn't really settle at the position to take a fly on him. So I think he's going to be looking to bet on himself as well in a short-term contract. Then you have Ryan Fitzpatrick, another one that really jumps out here because he arguably played as well as he ever has last year before he got benched for Tua Tagovailoa, which was just a move for the future. I've heard Washington being rumored. That makes a lot of sense for me because I think he could really be the trigger man that Scott turned offense. So he could sign a 2 or 3 year deal for minimal starter money. Then you have Tyra Taylor, who we all know now we feel kind of bad for because of the things that have happened to him. Has gotten a chance to start in a bunch of places, but oftentimes is taken away. But things that he just can't control by getting injured. Or last year, the ridiculous thing with the doctor puncturing his lung. I feel like every year it gets tougher for him to actually get a starting gig somewhere. He's going to be looking to compete somewhere. And that now depends on how much self-awareness he has, which quarterbacks he actually sees himself on the same level as, and where he has a chance to start potentially. So I think once again, a couple of years lower deal here. Andy Dalton. He's a guy, he started 9 years, I believe, in Cincinnati, and then came in as the backup in Dallas for just $3 million, which was a bargain at that time. And after that got hurt, he got plenty of chances to start, got hurt in between himself. But when he was out there, I thought he played pretty well. And he's a guy you can win some games with if you have the talent around him, like it in Cincinnati with AJ Green and all those other receivers, now in Dallas as well. Everybody talked about New England last year, how that connection would make some sense. I wouldn't mind seeing that this offseason. Then, of course, Nate Sudfeld, who obviously will be the starter in Philly since he replaced Jalen Hurts in the 4th quarter of Week 17 last year. I'm obviously joking here. Cam Newton, it really depends on what you see from him. He looks pretty broken down, but there's still a lot of talent in there, I'm sure. Just not sure if anybody's willing to spend any big bucks on him. If the Patriots don't really get anybody else to come in here, I could see him back in New England. There's at least 3 or 4 places around the league where he would be better than the starter right now. But like I said, last year, so many double-digit passing yardage performances late in the year, was benched in a bunch of 4th quarters. Looked really good the first couple of weeks, but then got COVID and never really returned to that form. And one more name that we have to discuss here, Jameis Winston. There's all this weird stuff with Drew Brees and that workout video. How there's a chance he's going to be back in New Orleans. After what I saw last year, I just don't see it. The arm has completely fallen off in my opinion. And Jameis Winston's still a talent guy. I mean, he was a number 1 overall pick for a reason. From the comments I've heard from Sean Payton, I just believe he wants to keep him in New Orleans, help him play a more clean game, and develop him as a starter again. And there may be some other bidders out there, so I would not be shocked if he's close to $20 million a year over the next couple of years, depending on what the Saints want to do. Because they are very tight on cap, but this is obviously a position that they have to address. And that's really kind of it for the quarterbacks here. Not really any interesting names other than that. So let's move on to the running backs. And I think this is the position that will suffer the most in free agency, outside of a couple of names, because the NFL doesn't really value them a whole lot anyway. And especially this year, they probably don't want to pay them prime money. As you can tell, there's a lot of journeyman veterans here. Whether you look at Mark Ingram, Tevin Coleman, James White, it's the first time for him at a new place most likely, but close to 30 now as well. Rex Burkhead, Carlos Hyde, further down the list, Dion Lewis, Chris Thompson, Jerick McKinnon, if he can ever stay healthy. Then you have LaShawn McCoy, Adrian Peterson, and of course the immortal Frank Gore. Unfortunately, Adam Gase is not coaching anywhere this year. Alfred Morris, Lamar Miller, all these kind of names. Even Le'Veon Bell, I'm counting him in the category as well by now. And those interesting names are further down the list here, but let's go back to the top. Those veterans I just discussed will most likely have multiple suitors, but will have to go with a few $1 million and be more of a backup and more of a presence in the room. And the fact those intriguing names are actually near the bottom doesn't bode well for the running back position, because that means that they were late round picks. But yeah, those veterans looking to sign with some contenders. But now let's look at some of the younger guys here. Kenyan Drake, I think there's a lot of mixed emotions with him when it comes to Arizona, because he came in 2019, and I think his first game against San Francisco he racked off 100 yards, which barely anybody did that year against the 49ers, who are probably the best defense in all football when you talk about the entirety of the season. Can contribute as a runner and receiver, just didn't look as dynamic last year. They brought in Chase Edmonds a whole lot, especially on third downs. He's going to be the primary passing back, and I think that makes Drake kind of expendable. If they get him back on a solid deal that works out for both sides, between that $6 and $8 million range maybe, I could see that happening. But if he wants to really make some cash, I think he's going to go somewhere else, if he can even find a place. And Edmonds will be more of the feature back for them, and they maybe bring in the second guy. Then you have Todd Gurley, and this is just a name that doesn't excite me. Last year, he was on the roster with guys like Brian Hill, Edo Smith, who are guys that I kind of like, but he should be in a different stratosphere than those guys. And he was actually the least dynamic one of the bunch. Like, they brought him in to close out games later in the year, and that worked out well, outside of the Detroit game, of course, when he kind of fell into the end zone. But to me, yeah, he's more of a goal line, short yardage guy, bringing him to close out games potentially, but he's not a feature back, of course, anymore. And I just didn't like anything I saw from him last season. Duke Johnson, he's actually 28 years old. Doesn't seem like he's been around that long, but he's a guy that can be a primary receiving back for a team. We saw last year, can't be quite that feature guy when David Johnson was out, but in a specific role as an RB2 and primary third down option, I think he makes a lot of sense. Matt Breida, only 26 years old. He's kind of that home run hitter for that one-cut zone type system that he also had with Shanahan. Didn't really get that chance, was bottled up a whole lot in Miami last year because they were one of the worst run blocking teams in the league. But he's a guy that if you put him in the right situation, he can be one of those guys to rip off big gains. More of a committee approach, I would say. Mike Davis, he's a very interesting name because last year he wasn't quite Christian McCaffrey, obviously, and that system in Carolina where they spread the field and give you a lot of light boxes makes it easy for the running back position overall. But I think unless they trade Christian McCaffrey in a deal for Deshaun Watson, I see them letting Davis go. If McCaffrey is actually included in some kind of trade package, I could see them bring him back and make him more of the featured option. He's a guy that I think the league is pretty high on overall. Leonard Fournette, Lombardi Lenny, obviously had a great round last year with the Bucks, late down the year. He's a guy that's probably going to get overpaid. Could see him come back from one more year at the Bucks to earn another ring potentially. But like I said, he hasn't really gotten a second contract yet. He's probably looking to make some big money. And I think the team that pays him will kind of regret it if they do. Then you have Malcolm Brown, who's kind of like a Mike Davis light. Lacks some of that big playability, but very dependable pass catcher and pass pro. And hard-nosed runner. I think he's going to be a nice guy to put in the committee. $2 to $3 million probably as well for a couple of years. Even less interesting guys. T.J. Yeldon. What do we have here down the road? Yeah, not really anybody that sticks out here. Let's get to the bottom now. So, first name here, James Conner. Has suffered a ton of injuries, has just been an inconsistent player. I think he's a guy that has to be looking for a short-term deal, prove himself again. Just prove that he can stay healthy and be an impact player for 16 weeks. Because with the Steelers, I'm not sure if they're looking to bring him back altogether after what they saw last year. And if he's coming back, like I said, 1 year, maybe $2 million. I wouldn't spend any more money on him because I just don't know what I'm getting. Gus Edwards, he's a nice north and south runner. Not really anything special in the pass game or in terms of breakaway speed, but he's a guy that can bang inside. You see 723 yards last year. That's more than most guys on this list. Obviously playing in Baltimore, it makes a lot of sense. And I could see them bring him back to pair with J.K. Dobbins. Would make a lot of sense to me. Then you have Mack, who formerly of the Colts now. And he's a guy that only played like a little more than a half of football. Obviously, the Colts likely not going to bring him back without yourself and Jonathan Taylor last season. But he's a fairly complete back and an average to above average starter in the right situation. That injury obviously sucks, but I think teams around the league will like him. Give him $4 or $5 million for 3 to 4 years potentially. Still only 25 years old. Then you have Wayne Gallman, who actually is 27, even though he was drafted in the same year, I believe. And I liked him quite a bit coming out of Clemson. I think he's an excellent option as an RB2, not necessarily a number 1. And then you have the 2 Green Bay guys, Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, which obviously have very different market values. One is a great running back 1, one is a great running back 2. We've heard some rumors with Miami for Aaron Jones, and I think that would make a lot of sense. Give you that dynamic option off the backfield that they don't necessarily have. Like, he can be close to top 5 back in this league, and I think Jamal Williams, he's an excellent option as a number 2, and really brings you that third down value with the things he can do in pass protection, and brings an attitude to the team. Down here we have Chris Carson from Seattle, another guy who injuries have just slowed him down so much, but a violent runner when he's out there, can be a lead guy for some team. I think with the injuries, he's not going to get paid as much as he wants. I think Seattle really wants to bring him back, but he's going to have to sell for a smaller deal than he probably would expect. And finally, you have Phillip Lindsay, another one of those home run hitters. He was actually better than Melvin Gordon last year with the Broncos. I loved him as an undrafted free agent coming out of Colorado a few years ago. I think he can be a really dynamic player in a part of a 1-2 punch, because we've seen he can't really shoulder the whole load. But like I said, in a 2-back system, that makes a lot of sense. And that brings us to our next position, wide receiver. And this is going to be one of the biggest markets this year. And we have another deep draft class when it comes to the wide receiver position. Obviously the name at the top, AJ Green, he's not going to be the highest paid among these guys. Looked like a shell of himself in 2020. I think he can still be a contributor, but nowhere near the number 1 guy. He's 33 years old, so he should be declining at this point of his career, but injuries have obviously exponentially increased that. He didn't want to be in Cincinnati a couple of years ago. I'm not sure how much that has changed. Now they have Joe Burrow in the house. But like I said, he's not going to be a number 1. He can be a number 2 potentially. Maybe revive his career a little bit if they put him more in the slot, which he didn't do early on in his career. But let's talk about, to me, the biggest name here, Allen Robinson. One of the most underrated wide receivers in the game. Can play inside and out, excellent route runner, gets the job done as a blocker, can win out of his breaks at the catch point, whichever way you want to go. Apparently there have been no discussion with the Bears yet, so I think he most likely is going to hit the open market unless they put the tag on him. But I think he's going to be a guy that will be a star somewhere else. A team like Baltimore makes a lot of sense for me because they need a true number 1 receiver, and he's just never played with a real quarterback. Other than that, there's a lot of veterans here. When you look at T.Y. Hilton, Larry Fitzgerald, Tyrell Williams, Deshaun Jackson, if you're looking for a 35-year-old deep threat that will play a couple of games for you. Then you have more younger guys with Sammy Watkins, who has been very productive when healthy, but just hasn't been able to stay on the field for the Chiefs these last couple of years. Once a highly talented prospect, kind of out of Clemson. Then you have a couple of guys in the slot here that can be contributors in Adam Humphries and Willie Snead. But 2 guys that I'm looking at here in this category, Marvin Jones and Corey Davis. Obviously Jones a little bit on the older side, but very productive last season. Always one of the more underrated receivers in the game. When Kenny Gallaudet was out for the Lions last season, he really turned it up. Played like one of the better receivers out there. And Corey Davis, one of the quietest, almost 1,000-yard receiving seasons. Missed a couple of games. A former top 5 draft pick, still a lot of talent there. Didn't quite adjust to the physicality of the league early on, but he's turned himself into a very good player and should make some good money in a longer term deal potentially, because as you see, he's only 26 years old. Tanyan Mandola also falls in the category of dependable slot receivers, even though he's 36 years old, so he might even be looking to reunite with Tom Brady in Tampa Bay on a short term deal for a couple of $1 million. But let's go down a little bit here with Will Fuller. That's a big name. Another guy who was really fighting with injuries throughout his career. Last year got suspended for PEDs, will miss a couple of games this season because of it, but you saw what he's capable of in extended stretches last season. One of the ultimate deep threats, but really a complete receiver last season. A little further down with it. And this really depends on if there are any teams out there that actually want to gamble on him. I think the most likely scenario, he's going to be back with Brady in Tampa Bay. And then Curtis Samuel, one of the more under the radar guys here, only 25 years old and already hitting free agency. I remember him being one of the younger prospects coming into the draft and someone that I really liked. And we saw last season under a capable offensive coordinator like Joe Brady, who knew how to utilize his skill set as a run after the catch guy, utilizing him vertically, getting him some touches out of the backfield. I think he's a guy that could be looked at as the gadget type of player for a team. Like a 4-year deal, $32 million, something like that would make a lot of sense to me. And then there's a lot of other veterans, Dwayne Harris, Des Bryant, Mohamed Sanu. Not really anybody of note here until we get to Juju Smith-Schuster, one of the most productive receivers at the age of 25 in NFL history. Of course, I didn't love all the logo dancing shit, but he's a cool guy, a very physical player, but just over 800 yards on a ridiculously low 8.6 yards per catch. Pittsburgh, with their group of receivers, probably won't be able to bring him back. He said he wants to be a Steelers lifer, but I just don't see them being able to pay double-digit dollars, which he at least is going to command in the open market. Maybe reunite with Sam Darnold in New York if he stays there. Nelson Aguilar had a sneaky good season as well, was one of the better deep threats in the game last season, but really worked the underneath areas as well. Just not quite sure what you're going to get from him. But really the next big name that's going to come up here, I have to scroll down a little bit, and there's the two big ones right next to each other. Chris Godwin, first one, 25 years old as well only. Extremely physical slot receiver who has a lot to offer after the catch. Tampa Bay maybe looking to focus on Shaquille Barrett this offseason and bring back Antonio Brown instead. He had some drop issues. They've talked about how they want to place the franchise tag on him potentially. But with all the guys that they have to pay, I could see him being the odd man out, and he's still young. He hasn't had that big deal yet, and I think he's going to make in that $14 to $16 million potentially over a few years. And then Kenny Gallaudet, a couple of years older, more of a typical big-bodied X receiver who can win on vertical stamps, be a jump ball specialist. He would be a guy that's going to be great in Baltimore to punish those one-on-ones that they present to the outside receivers. I don't really see any reason for him to stick around in Detroit. But he and Godwin could both get franchise tagged, but if those guys are on the open market, like I said, in those mid-teens per year, and they're going to get more long-term contracts potentially in that 4-year range. And then there's really only a couple of names that stick out to me, like an Allen Lazard, or further down the list if we go here, you have Zach Pascal, who are solid number 2s and great number 3 receivers, whoever brings them in. But let's move on to the tight end position. And this is one that brings a lot less volume to the table. The big one here is Hunter Henry, dynamic option at all 3 levels. Can't really see the Chargers let him go, especially with their young star quarterback being brought in and the connection they have built already in year 1. Then you have Rob Gronkowski, and I really only expect him to be back with Brady, so not much to discuss here. Just depends on how much he actually wants to make and what the Bucs can offer him. Jared Cook, a guy that's really slowing down at this stage of his career. Most likely gone with the Saints with the young guy that they have in Adam Troutman there. So his last memory with New Orleans will be a pretty bad one with the fumble that he had in the divisional round loss against the Bucs. He's going to be signing some veteran short-term deal most likely. And then there's a lot of number 2s who mostly will be used as blockers. When you look at Tyler Croft, Virgil Green, Mercedes Lewis, further down the list, let's see. The guys that focus in here, first one would be Everett from the Rams. Basically an oversized wide receiver, but once a second round pick with a versatile skill set. Him and Tyler Higbee really took the production away from each other last season, but I think he can be used to stretch the seams, be that run after catch guy that he can use a lot of different ways. Then you have more veteran guys like Jordan Reed and Trey Burton, both on minimal deals last year, and didn't really do a whole lot to earn anything more this season because of getting hurt again. For Burton, I could see a reunitement with Carson Wentz if he wants him back, now in Indianapolis. And then if we go a little further down here, Juju Smith, that's one of the big names. He can really line up anywhere from fullback, as a wing, flexed out wide. He's a very versatile player, only 26 years old, one of the best guys after the catch. They even put him in the backfield and straight up handed it to him a couple of times in Tennessee. I think he's a guy that's going to demand $6 to $8 million a year and get more of that long-term contract since he's still a young guy. And then there's really only Dan Arnold is just down here somewhere. Had a pretty solid season, kind of an interesting player. Was pretty productive in the Cliff Kingsbury offense, which really doesn't feature the tight end usually. Maybe they'll be looking to bring him back on some kind of long-term deal that is more team-friendly. And then, of course, right above him, Robert Tanyan. Kind of a George Kittle light to me. should have been a Pro Bowler last season in my opinion, over Evan Ingram. Excellent fit for those zone type systems, who is a very good blocker at the point of attack, can climb to the second level, be a threat after the catch, when you leak him out into the flats or work him over the top of play action, those bootlegs. I'm guessing Green Bay really wants to bring him back, but he's a guy who could earn some money in the open market. We'll definitely be looking for more of a long-term contract in the $5-6 million range probably. And that brings us to the offensive tackle position. And I already discussed this, how Orlando Brown, his decision, where he wants to go, and what the Ravens will do with him will have a lot to do with these guys end up, and also what extension he may receive, how that affects other players on the market. Plus, we have a pretty deep class of offensive tackles in the draft. Obviously, the one guy at the top, Trent Williams. I think San Francisco will make a hard push to re-sign him. Otherwise, he'll clearly be the biggest name out there on the open market. Still an elite left tackle, not 33 years old, so definitely could be on a decline in the next couple of years, but we haven't seen it yet. Russell Okung, on the other hand, just has not been able to stay healthy. Only one season in his career where he started all 16 games. Missed a total of 19 games his last couple of years combined. So I'm guessing some desperate teams may want to pay him as a starting tackle, but to me that's just too much risk to actually bring him in and expect him to start a full slate of games. Alejandroville Nueva of the Pittsburgh Steelers was kind of overrated for a while because people just love the story of an Army veteran, but he's a solid starter and that's what teams are willing to spend money on in the NFL. 33 years old as well, so more of a 2-3 year deal probably. I think the Steelers will try to bring him back. But yeah, like you see here, $5-6 million a year, that would make a lot of sense for me. And then you have more of those okay starters, mostly right tackles, Rick Wagner, Tyne Secchi, Cameron Fleming, Matt Filer, all kind of in that same category, throw them all together. In between the Jason Peters, he's a guy that I think the Eagles would be trying to bring back just because of the versatility he presents. Was slated to start at guard last season, but then because of an injury, moved back to tackle, switched sides, but now 39 years old. He's close to retirement, already discussed it last season. So I think it will be really up to him if he wants to play for another year. And if he does, then I think the Eagles will make a lot of sense. A little further down here, Daryl Williams of the Bills had a pretty solid season last year. And it really depends on what the Bills want to do. If they may want to move Cody Ford back out to tackle, if they're willing to re-sign John Feliciano on the inside, but otherwise for Williams, 2-3 years, in that $4 million range most likely as well. Then Cam Robinson, only 26 years old, very talented player coming out of Alabama, hasn't developed the way that the Jaguars expected him to. I think the market will depend on what teams think of him moving inside to guard, because I just think that's what he is at the NFL level, and I think he could be a valuable piece at the position. And then as you look for those, a lot of backups, really only one big name left if you go a little further down here. And that's Taylor Moton. Played near Pro Bowl level last year for Carolina. Has the versatility to play anything but center along the front. I think he's a candidate to get that double-digit million on a 4 to 5 year deal potentially. That's the kind of regard that I hold him in. Maybe this year it hurts him a little bit, but tackles always needed in the NFL. And he's a guy that could be a cornerstone for a franchise. With Carolina being the first ones that should be making an offer because they already had some issues on the O-line with him. And then finally for offense, with the interior offensive line, and we can't quite group guards and centers together, so we're going to start with the center position since there's less names to discuss here. First you have Nick Martin, who just was released by the Texans, as they are trying to enter tank mode officially once Deshaun Watson's traded. I think he'll be a solid starter for some team, in that $8 million range on a 3 to 4 year deal. Then you have Alex Mack, who is 36 years old by now, but still an above average starter at the position. Very close to retirement, I'm guessing. So he might be a short-term fix for some team, like if Green Bay doesn't re-sign their starter, or somewhere else in a similar situation. Pouncey's still on here, he's already retired with his brother. But that brings us to the big name here, and that's what I just discussed with Green Bay. Corey Linsley, to me the best center in all of football. An elite pass protector, excellent zone blocker, got hurt late last year, but he'll go north of $10 million over a 4 or 5 year deal for sure, either with the Packers or somewhere else, and I think Green Bay should absolutely be looking to bring him back. A couple of former New England guys in David Andrews and Tack Karras, close to their 30s now, solid starters that will get the job done, got drilled pretty hard as snappers, and are a good piece of the puzzle for an offensive line with plenty of experience communicating. I think Andrews will be back with the Patriots. And for the Dolphins, I'm very interested to see how they put their front five together, where they already had 4 new starters last year and could still be looking to add to it. Both those guys probably in the 6 to 8 million range on a 2 or 3 year basis. And then there's really only one more name if you look a little further down here, that's Austin Reiter, the only guy who started every single game at the same position for Kansas City last year. They might let him test the market, but can't really afford to lose him. Probably also on a 2 or 3 year deal for around $4 million a season. That sounds about right to me. And then there's nobody really else here that stands out to me if you look further down the list here. So let's look at the guards now. And right at the top, Brandon Sherf, top 3 guard in all of football. Really a tone setter for an offensive line. Washington would just be absolutely foolish to let him go. But he will command $15 to $60 million a year on a long-term deal, I believe. So they're going to have to go deep into their pockets. The other really big name here, Joe Fooney, 29 years old, from New England, was franchise tagged last season. I just expect him to hit the open market, because New England, if they tag him again, pay close to $18 million, I believe now. They have plenty of salary cap right now, but with a lot of moves that they have to make, I'm not sure if they had that kind of money on the side. And I could see 2 rivals from the division make a hard run at him, with the Dolphins and the Jets. And then there's a lot more of those solid starters, Nick Easton, Lane Taylor, J.R. Sweezy, Senor Kilomete, John Miller, Austin Blythe, Sean Feliciano, I just talked about him. He's an interesting guy, had a pretty good year last year for the Bills, and should be a priority to retain for Josh Allen to protect him. Some more guys in that mold, Brian Winters, Mike Capati, he's already retired actually. And then here, Forrest Lamb for the Chargers. Average starter at best, I would say, but jumped in at Santa last season. They only have 1 starter on the interior coming back, so they may be looking to re-sign him on a friendly deal for the team. Let him test the market, see what he can get, but probably not going to be able to get a big number here, and maybe coming back to Los Angeles. And then the 2 guys that actually stand out to me, Kelechi Osemele, he is old now, but he was awesome the first 2 games for the Chiefs last season. Rogue rate in the run game. I think the Chiefs will be looking to bring him back on a short-term deal, because when he's been healthy in his career, he's been one of the better guards in all football, just hasn't really been able to the last couple of seasons. And then you have DJ Fluker, kind of a similar player, has the flexibility to start at tackle as well. With Orlando Brown out of the building, Baltimore may be looking to bring him back. Got him on a bargain deal last season, bring some versatility, so a name to keep an eye on. And with that, we move on to the defense. And thankfully, Spotrick allows us to sort this by edge. So we have the defensive ends and the outside linebackers in a 3-4 together here. There's still going to be some outside linebackers to play off the ball, like Devontae David or KJ Wright if you go down here. And I'm not sure why it doesn't show me the value of these players, but it's still going to be sorted by the amount of money that they earned last season. And this group includes some stars like Juan Miller, who I wouldn't be surprised if he was part of a trade package, or maybe even the option was declined altogether because of cap purposes. But when healthy, he's still a difference maker coming off that edge. And we just saw what JJ Watt got. To me, when they're both healthy, Miller is a more valuable player and they're both at the same age. Then you have a trio of guys who played under the tag last year, with Matt Judon, who's a very well-liked player in that Ravens locker room, fairly complete outside backer, not necessarily a dominant pass rusher. Lennon Williams, who I wouldn't classify as a true edge necessarily, because of how much he lines up inside on passing downs, but he really went from a head-scratcher when you look at the tag being put him in last year, to one of the most versatile defensive linemen in all of football. And then Bud Dupree, who was having a phenomenal season until he tore his ACL, which might ultimately work out for the Steelers, but it may cost him a long-term deal that he really deserves. Not sure if any teams are willing to give either one of those guys that mega deal, but should get anywhere from $12 to $16 million a year if they do. There's one more guy who played under the tag last year right underneath them, but right now I'm putting him in a different stratosphere, and that's Shaquille Barrett. Super Bowl hero, but also an elite edge rusher. These are the type of guys that should get paid regardless. Tampa Bay will make a hard push, but ultimately I expect him to get outbid. Somebody like the Colts would make a lot of sense, because he could really take that defense to another level, because he lacked that true edge presence. He's a number one, and those are rare to find. Then with Jadeveon Clowney, Just bad gamble a couple of years ago when he didn't sign a long-term deal. Now we'll have to sign something short-term, again to re-establish himself as a high-level player. We've seen the heights, and those are very high because he's such a physical player, the versatility he brings, but just hasn't shown it these last couple of years. Then there's plenty of veterans like Justin Houston, Ryan Kerrigan, Olivia Vernon, who are kind of all pushing that same pot. And we'll be looking for those like 2-year deals worth close to double digits somewhere, which all makes sense with teams like Tennessee, Baltimore, Kansas City, maybe Tampa Bay to replace Shaq Barrett, or San Francisco. Those type of contending teams that can bring those guys in. But 2 more intriguing names here. First, Yannick Ngakoue. He really sticks out, only 26 years old. Flashed in Minnesota and Baltimore last year, and could be potentially a number 1, but may have hit his peak in Jacksonville when he was playing alongside a lot of studs on that D-line. And then you have Leonard Floyd, who is more of a Robin to a Batman, but can offer plenty of versatility, stopping the run, dropping into coverage, working on different games up front. And then if we go down a little further, there's 3 young guys, not coming off their first deals. You have Hassan Reddick, who really had a breakout season, but most of his production came in a couple of games, and I think he's going to get overpaid because of that. Arizona will be looking to bring him back, but now with JJ Watt in, he may not be as big a priority. Let's see the way he can develop. I really liked him coming out of Temple. Such a versatile player, can play off the ball, be a rush on passing downs, but he was best last year when he had that clear role. Then we have to move a little further down here still. Can't quite see his name yet. Wow, that's far down. Here we go. Right next to each other, Trey Hendrickson and Carl Lawson. For Hendrickson, he really had a Pro Bowl level season in 2020. I think he can get 12 to 14 million a year personally. As that true 4-3 defensive end, put him on the strong side, he can defend the run, be dominant on passing downs as we saw last season. And Carl Lawson, one of the more under the radar guys, quietly finished top 5 in total quarterback pressures and number 1 in knockdowns. He's better than a lot of guys that we've seen on this list that are way above him when it comes to the pay that they got last season. And he's dealt with some injuries, but he's going to earn double-digit million for a couple of years as well, I believe. Still only 26 years old. Now let's move on to the interior defensive line. And once again, we're going to go with defensive line here. So it's trying to show us the 4-3 D ends as well. But if we just went with defensive tackle, it wouldn't show us those 3-4 defensive ends. Obviously, Watt and Williams we just discussed. Then we have K1 Short, one of the more dominant players up in Carolina who wasn't really recognized for it, but now 32 and on the decline, probably looking to sign a short-term deal with some kind of contender. Jarrell Casey was recently cut by Denver, kind of in that same mold in the twilight of his career. Still a valuable veteran though. Then a little further down here on Ndamukong Suh, and it's really one of the wild cards because I could easily see him back with the Bucs for another year, depending on how much he wants to make. There's Solomon Thomas, the former number 3 overall pick by the 49ers, who just never panned out because he couldn't really play one position at the NFL level and has been dealing with some personal issues and then injuries later on when he finally started to have some success as a rotational player. And then you have a lot of veterans who will be looking for the short-term deal somewhere, like a Daquan Jones, Alan Bailey, Jonathan Hankins, Corey Peters, all these kind of names. Lawrence Guy, actually one of the more underrated ones. The things he does for New England, can really play anywhere from a 0 to a 5 technique. Roy Robertson Harris, he's an interesting guy because when he's gotten extended stretches of play for Chicago, he's really shined. Just with Akeem Hicks and Eddie Goldman there, he didn't really get a chance until this season. I think he's going to be a guy that makes more than most people expect him to. And then if we go a little further down, Shelby Harris, close to be the top 10 defensive tackle in the league in my opinion, 30 years old now. The Broncos brought him back on a $3 million deal last season, I believe. I'd be surprised if it doesn't go for $6 to $8 million this season, and more of a 2 to 3 year contract. Sheldon Rankins, a guy that was very high on coming out of college, showed a lot of promise early on with the Saints. Injuries have really stalled that development as well, but I think he could end up being a steal for somebody. If he can stay on the field. Derek Wolfe, pretty good veteran who might come back to Baltimore or join a different contender on a short-term deal. And then there's a lot of run stuffers like Steve McClendon, Tyson Alualu. If Further down here, Raheem Nunez-Roches, all those kind of names. And the one that kind of stands out here to me, Dalvin Tomlinson, 27 years old. Another guy who can really play anywhere from a 5-0 technique and immediately upgrade a run defense. And then we also have Brent Urban here somewhere. I think I have to go down a little bit. Here he is. Actually played very well for Chicago last season. And Larry Ogunjobi, a disruptive upfield player, great fit as a free technique. Looks like Cleveland will have to let him go, but he will earn around $5 million annually somewhere and be the starter for sure, in my opinion. Like, he's another one of those very under the radar guys. And with that, we move on to linebacker. Once again, this will conclude a lot of pass rushers and those edge guys. So let's just go for it. Yeah, like I said, first 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 names are actually edge rushers. But then we have Lavonte David. To me, he always seemed like a Bucs lifer, but he won't be disrespected either if the Bucs try to lowball him. So I see him commanding $10 to $12 million over a 2 to 3 year deal, and that's why the Bucs may not want to match that with Darren White's contract on the horizon as well. But still definitely a top 10 linebacker in the league, and could be an excellent veteran addition to some team. Avery Williams would make a lot of sense if the Pittsburgh Steelers brought him back and kind of replaced Vince Williams with him, depending on how much money he wants to make to pair up with Devin Bush. KJ Wright had an outstanding season last year, maybe even better than Bobby Wagner. Not overall, but that season in particular. One of the top pass coverage and now also blitzing linebackers in the game. Expect him to be in the $10 million range as well. And then you have a lot of just solid starters like Christian Kirksey, Danny Perriman, Devontae Campbell maybe. An interesting one here, Cala Fackrell. Brings a lot of versatility to the table. Was involved in pretty much all of the big plays for the Giants last season. Can rush off the edge or play off the ball. And could get a bigger deal than most people expect. He's a guy that I'm just not sure about what the market will look like for him. Eric Wilson, impressive 2020 season, replacing Anthony Barr. Very rangy player that could get a bigger deal than most people expect. And then there's just a lot of replacement level guys. When you look at this veterans, nobody that really sticks out here. Ruben Foster, 27 years old. No idea what's going on with him off the field. When he's on it, I just know he's a dynamic player, but he just hasn't been committed and not been able to get his shit together. So the only 2 names that I want to talk about here, and we have to go pretty far down the list. I think they're right next to each other as well. Yeah, here we have Matt Milano as the first one. One of the best players nobody talks about ever. One of the key pieces of the Buffalo defense. That defense got astronomically better once he returned from injury for the second half of the year. Can stop the run, cover tight ends and all kind of stuff. And then you have Jayon Brown, also tremendous in the pass game. Kind of fits the category as well. Tennessee may take a gamble here and hope to resign him on a lower budget. But I think if a team sees the kind of skills that he presents, he's a guy that I'd be spending quite a bit of money on. In between the Anthony Walker is actually an interesting name as well. Could definitely be a starting level player who earns a couple of $1 million. But with that, let's move on to the cornerbacks. So we've now gotten to the secondary. Actually, go secondary as well, but I'm going to start with corners here. Makes more sense to me. And as you can see, a lot of veteran names. A lot of guys that are well known by the casual fans as well, but that are all clearly out of their prime. Whether you look at Patrick Peterson, AJ Bouye, he's actually the one that I have the most hope for still. But then Richard Sherman, Josh Norman, Jason McCourty actually played better than most of these guys last season, but also not 34 years old. DJ Hayden, he's an okay number 2. I don't expect him to be back in Jacksonville with the whole movement that they have going on there. Buster Screen just cut by the Bears. And he's another one of those guys, as you can see. There's a lot of guys that play in the slot primarily in that range. With Screen, Brian Poole. You have Mackenzie Alexander and Mike Hilton. Poole was pretty high sought after, coming from Atlanta. But he's missed some time with the Jets now. Mackenzie Alexander also took a bit of a dip in Cincinnati. But Mike Hilton, arguably the best nickel in the league. And key for the Pittsburgh defense. He should be a high priority for them and will demand, I think, around $8 million annually if he does hit the open market at only 27 years old. There's 2 more names that should be in that category as well. If we go down here a little bit with K1 Williams and somewhere down here, I can't find him right now, doesn't matter. That's Desmond King. San Francisco and Tennessee should be looking to bring him back, but they could be valuable assets wherever they go. There's plenty of veterans here with Xavier Rhodes, Ronald Darby, Bashard Breeland, that really are also those short-term kind of guys. Quinton Dunbar also kind of falls in the category. Had a good 2019 season, didn't really see much from him last year. There's really 4 more guys that I want to highlight here, and they're going to be all over the board here, so I'm just going to stay. The first name here you see in the middle of the screen, William Jackson, to me has the potential to be a true shutdown number 1 corner, but he was slowed down quite a bit as well last season, so we might go for a little less. But this is the guy I'd throw big money on if I needed that type of player. Then you have Jason Verrett, who had kind of a comeback player of the year type season. Top 10 cornerback in the league for sure, and fits those cover 3 type systems. Similarly, Shaq Griffin, who has been in Seattle and done so as the best corner for them for a few years now. And then somewhere further down the list is also J.C. Jackson of the Patriots, especially if they decide to trade Stephon Gilmore, which has been out there quite a bit. They actually did some shenanigans last year, but he didn't put him on the Pro Bowl ballot originally, to not allow him to get those votes, and maybe the contract now this year could be a little less. All these kind of things, I'm not quite sure if I like what they did there. But he's a guy that could be a number 1 as well. I think he was second behind only Xavier Howard in terms of interceptions around the league. But that brings us to the safety position, the last one we're going to talk about today. I'm sorry I'm not going to discuss kickers or punters here. So safety position, there's still plenty of young guys here that have a lot of upsides, and I expect to sign somewhere on a short-term deal to kind of revive their careers. If you go down the list here, like a Malik Hooker, Keanu Neal, Carl Joseph, even though he actually had a pretty good year for the Browns last season and would make sense to bring him back. And then there's some veterans that I like quite a bit, like the often forgotten Ricardo Allen from Atlanta, who was one of the better players for them for several years. Jaquaski Tart, who was actually close to being a perfect fit at strong safety for the Seattle type systems. Then you have Trey Boston, who was recently released by the Panthers and could bring a lot of leadership to a young secondary somewhere. And then Daniel Sorensen, who has just constantly made big plays for the Chiefs these last couple of years. But in this category, I want to highlight 5 names here, and we start at the top here. Justin Simmons for the Broncos, arguably a top 3 center fielder in the game with a lot of range and who excels at the catch point. Similarly, Anthony Harris of the Vikings, not quite at that same level I would say, and has some issues as a tackler, but very similar player. Denver should absolutely bring back Simmons. With Harris, I'm just not quite sure if they're already paying Harrison Smith, if they can pay what the open market will dictate. A little further down here, Marcus May had an excellent season last year for the Jets. One of the very few bright spots for that team. True playmaker, and should be close to double digit annually as well. Hopefully Robert Saleh brings him back and builds the defense around him, and guys like Quinnen Williams. Then you have Marcus Williams, still mostly remembered for the Minnesota Miracle where he looked pretty bad, but one of the most reliable free safeties in the game, and kind of that similar mold. I think he's going to be down here somewhere. That's John Johnson III for the Rams, also not mentioned very often, but an excellent player for that LA defense. All of those guys should be able to demand 10 to 15, maybe even $60 million a year somewhere, with a lot of it guaranteed. The only question now will be, what kind of span are we talking about? But as you can see, not really any guys that necessarily stand out other than that. So let's wrap this thing up. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with a couple of friends to keep them busy over the off season. Like I already mentioned, my video on the quarterbacks that could be on the move this offseason will pop up here any second, and I also have a write-up on my page helloswithfootballtalk.com on my favorite fits between NFL teams and draft prospects, so check that out. Follow me on all my social media channels, they'll link down below in the description as well, and I will be back soon to either analyze any deals that are being made or get some more into draft coverage. So until then, see you later. Peace!